Hi, it's Nicki here, and I'm back at nearly the end of the month for another book vlog looking at what I've read during the last few weeks. I'm a couple of days early from the end of the month this time, simply because my husband's going to be around over the weekend and I could just envision him walking in the middle of me having to start all over again. So I thought I'd get it done today while he's at work, and it won't make that much difference in what I've read, haven't read. I'm going to start with 3 print books, so I can wave them at you. 2 of them don't really have much of a cover to speak of, so it's probably a bit pointless, but we'll see. All these books were bought in a special used book sale at the City State Library a couple of months ago, so I got them all for under $5 each, or $5 I should say. I still go English sometimes with my currency. First up, this impressive tome is Edward Gibbons' The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's an abridged version. Yeah, this is abridged. I've wanted to read this for ages. Saw this abridged version, which seemed like a great idea because single volume rather than all those multiple volumes in the full version. I started it a few days ago, and I've marked it as read and taken it off my list, even though I only got 50 pages through. There's nothing wrong with it. It's very interesting. I mean, I've given it 4 stars. It's an interesting work. I really enjoy being able to have this abridged version, so that I've got the option of reading it without having to commit to that huge work. But it is pretty dry and stodgy, so it's really not bedtime reading. It's not the book you take to bed to relax before you go to sleep. So I've marked it as read, and I'm simply going to stick it on the shelf, and whenever I have an odd 5-10 minutes during an afternoon in between doing things, I'll just read a chapter or 2 and just keep doing that till I finish it, rather than commit to reading it all in one go, because it's really not that sort of book. Next up, similar kind of theme, Aristotle's Poetics. Politics, sorry. This one's an interesting one. I wanted to read it because it's one of those on the classics list that you kind of feel you should read. These days, I think if someone like Aristotle came along and decided to write this book these days, every activist group, feminists, whatever, would be up in arms. I'm not sure that his decisions on where women's places and slaves' places and such are really going to work these days, but as a historical document, certainly really interesting read if you're into Greek history, ancient history. I think I gave it 3 stars. Did I give it 3 stars? Yeah, I've got my list here. Yes, 3 stars. And the final print one was Angela Carter's Nights at the Circus. Angela Carter's an author that I've been wanting to read for a while. I've had several of her books on my book depository wish list for months, if not years. And I saw this one and decided to give it a go. And on the whole, I enjoyed it. It's a 4-star read for me. It's quite a bizarre tale about a woman who may or may not be part bird, and a reporter that rushes off to join the circus in order to follow her and try to discover the truth. If you like sort of fantasy realism, I would say, then this is probably a book for you. If you like things like the Night Circus, slightly different feel, but sort of a slightly absurd, but with this hint of what's real and what's not. So then we move on to the ebooks that I've read. I mean, just glancing down the list, pretty much all of these were review requests, either direct from an author and publisher or ones that I got from NetGalley. So the first one was a publisher direct review request. The book is called The Last Gods of Indochine, and it's by Samuel Ferrer. This was an interesting story. I've got to try and find a way to talk about it without really giving it away. It's one of those stories that blends narratives from different time frames. So you've got a young woman who's gone off into Indochine, to Angkor, essentially. Following in her grandfather's footsteps. He was a great explorer. She's drawn there by this sort of force, and it turns out her tale is related to events that took place way in the past. And yeah, I kind of want to tell you stuff, but I can't in case you read it. So on the whole, it was a very enjoyable book. 4-star read again for me. It didn't absolutely captivate me so much that I'd want to rush back to it a second time, but it was certainly enjoyable as I was reading. The pacing was good, it kept me interested from start to finish, and I liked the way the narratives blended. Next up, yet another 4-star read. It's all a mix of 3s and 4s this month. You may wonder why all my book reviews they all tend to hover around the 4-star mark. And one of the reasons for that is that I am very selective. If someone asks me to review something, if I don't think it's a good fit that I'm going to give at least a 3 stars above 2, then I wouldn't accept it. The books I buy, I'm very selective now about what I buy because of lack of funds, so certainly you'd be very hard pressed to find anything under a 3. Very occasionally I'll give a 2 if something looked appealing but then didn't really work for me, but everything will hover around a 4, so 3 to 5s, but 4 is my sort of median point. So anyway, this book is a NetGalley one. It's called Agent of Enchantment, and it's by CRawford and Alex Rivers. This is the first book in what's going to be a series. From memory, I think the series is called The Dark Fae FBI, something along those lines. Essentially, it's a sort of crime story blended with urban fantasy. So the main girl has a Fae heritage that she discovers during the course of the story. She's an FBI agent, and she's a profiler, and she's looking for a serial killer in London who turns out to be someone of supernatural origins. Again, I don't want to give too much away. So, very enjoyable read. I loved the premise. The world building was very good. I liked the idea of the sort of mirror version of London that exists that she can access through reflections. So yeah, it was definitely a very entertaining read, and I would certainly continue with the series if I got the opportunity to read the next one. The next one is a 3-star read, again from NetGalley. Again, the first book in what's planned as a series. It's called Strange Magic, and it's the first book of the Essex Witches series, and it's written by Sidmore. Now this one was a 3-star read for me. I really loved the idea. When I saw the cover, it's beautiful, the blurb was interesting. However, when I started reading, I didn't dislike it, but it wasn't quite what I'd expected. From the blurb and the cover, I'd expected a very overtly paranormal, supernatural tale. I expected actual witchcraft to be an integral part of the story. It looks like the series may head that way later, but certainly in this first book, there are events that supposedly could be supernatural, but the characters usually try to explain them away in some kind of rational, logical manner. So there is no overt acceptance of the supernatural and the paranormal. You get the hint that some characters do believe in it and maybe are capable of it, but it's not absolutely declared, at least not in this first book, which I found a bit disappointing. The story kind of plodded along, there were some exciting moments, but then the pace kind of slowed a little, and I think without that supernatural element as well, that kind of held things up a bit too. So I might read a second book, just to see how it develops, whether it does become more sort of urban fantasy-like, or probably paranormal more than urban fantasy. It's a bit more of a rural setting, but we'll see. It was a 3 stars, still good, but just didn't quite meet my expectations based on the way the story had been presented in the blurb. 2 more to go. The next one is another 3-star read for me, The History of Bees by Maja Lunde, Norwegian. I think Norwegian, yes, Norwegian writer. This is one of those stories with multiple narrations across centuries as well. I've read a few of these lately. It seems to be a new trend. Well, not new perhaps, but it's been around for a while. But I've read quite a few lately, like new releases where it's a dominant part of the storytelling, whereas before you just found the odd 1 or 2. And in this, I mean, I'm not talking about books where you have someone investigating the past and you get that past story in parallel. There's quite a lot of those. This is more like, it's not quite Cloud Atlas, but that style where you have all these different narrations and they're all kind of related, but it doesn't really make sense until later how that happens. If that makes sense. this one had 3 narrators, one set in like way in the future, and a couple, one in modern, so our roughly present time, and one in the past. And it's obviously about bees. I mean, all the characters are related to bees in some way. One's a beekeeper who is affected, the one in near present, affected by colony collapse. The future one is obviously like, how is the world functioning now the bees are gone? And the historical one is like a naturalist who is trying to develop a new style of beehive. But every time he develops something, he discovers that someone else in the world has got it before him. I enjoyed it. I liked the 3 narratives, but I never fell in love with them. None of the characters gripped me in a way that I was desperate to know what was going to happen to them and their families. Eventually, at the end, everything did pull together, and you found out sort of how all the links related, but I felt that was a little bit rushed and kind of added on as an afterthought. It felt that way a bit to me, like it wasn't, you could have just done the stories as they were and without relating them, and it wouldn't have not worked, if you see what I mean. But so it's a 3-star read. It was enjoyable, but it didn't grip me, it didn't make me desperate to turn the page every night. And finally, this book I'm actually still in the process of reading, but I will be finishing it tomorrow. So I mean, unless the ending turns out to be absolutely rubbish, I'm planning to give it 4 stars. This is another NetGalley read. It's called Rotherweird by Andrew Caldecott. This has been very enjoyable so far. It's another, almost a sort of fantasy realism again, but it's got this town that's been shut off from the rest of the world because of the terrible things that happen there. And we discover as this new character comes into the town, and we eventually link up. It's fairly third-person omniscient, so you're getting everyone's points of view. But essentially, we start with this guy who's come in to teach modern history because old history is forbidden. Anything before 1800s is forbidden in the town, because that's the way the authorities are guarding this secret of the terrible things that happened in the past. So we have this sort of story that involves, essentially it's science, but it's kind of a magical version of science, of these things that have gone on. And all these characters have different motivations for trying to uncover the truth. Again, I'm floundering a bit here because I don't want to give away like the key points of the story and any of the twists while I tell you what it's about, but definitely a sort of fantasy novel, but with this sort of reality twist in it. And there's sort of the idea of chimeras, hybrid creatures. I can't tell you too much without giving it away, but anyway, it's been a great read. As I said, unless the ending proves really disappointing, I'm going to give it 4 stars. It's been very entertaining, and this one has kept me turning the page. It's a reasonably long one, but as I said, I will finish it either tonight or tomorrow night. I'm actually a little bit behind on my Goodreads goal. I've had a few nights when I've not had much time to read, and I've been reading a few slightly longer works lately. So I've dropped 1 book behind, I think, at the moment on my goal for the year. I am planning to catch up. I received some money for Easter from my in-laws and bought myself a few books with that. And a lot of those books are going to be fairly quick reads, so I'm waiting for them to arrive in the mail, probably next week, the week after. And once I get those, I will be able to skim through those pretty quick, and that'll catch me up on my goal count, I think. I've still got another 3 NetGalley ones waiting to read, so I need to prioritise those a bit as well. And I've got about another 10, 11 other books, paperback, hardbacks, sitting here waiting as well. So plenty to keep me busy. And I will be back with you all again at the end of May. I had to think about the months for a minute then. So until then, anyway, happy reading, and I'll see you again in a few weeks. As an addendum, I realised as I was saying it, I completely mispronounced chimera. So apologies for that earlier. Even as I said it, I was like, it's not right, it's Greek, it doesn't sound like that. So yes, should be chimera. Sorry.